You're watching part 2 of our one-on-one interview with Department of Justice Secretary Leila de Lima here on Newscafe. Secretary, welcome again. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
The Atimonan incident, how does this affect the relationship between the PNP and the NBI, the Department of Justice?
Well, I don't think there's any negative effect or negative impact on the relationship. If at all, any effect it has is on the positive side, in the sense that we're able to really collaborate with each other. So even if NBI has been designated as the sole investigative body to look into what really happened in Atimonan, please remember that the initial investigation was conducted by PNP, particularly through SOCO. And that is why it was allowed, PNP was allowed to do its fact-finding investigation, at least on the physical evidence, on the findings of the SOCO, the ballistics, the on-scene investigation, although it was only partial. The one turned over, the report, the PNP fact-finding report as turned over to the NBI did not really cover all of those. So kinontinue na lang ng NBI. And in fact, NBI had to do a re-autopsy of the corpses, of the bodies of the victims. And out of the 13 bodies, 11 were re-autopsied by the NBI medical legal officer. So, and tama lang naman yung desisyon ng Pangulo to give it to NBI because PNP's own men are involved in the operations. No matter what the results would have been prescinding from the PNP investigation, some quarters would not consider that as credible. If investigating your own men, you come up with some findings, right, then especially if the findings would tend to absolve your men, some sectors would not accept that and would always find fault in the results of the investigation. So NBI, even if NBI is still part of the executive department, since it's a constituent agency of the DOJ, which is part of the executive department, it is still an independent investigative body.
What was this all about, Secretary?
Which one?
The Atimonan incident.
The Atimonan incident. Yan nga ang tinitingnan. So aside from...
Wetting?
Yes.
Okay.
From the looks of it, it looks from the NBI own finding, yun ang tinutumbok, yung wetting angle.
Okay.
The rivalry, the turf war, money. It's all about money. Just like any illegal activity, it boils down to money. Because if you control an illegal activity like wetting, like drugs, etc., that means millions of money. And then, although that one is kind of sensitive, and that's why we're slow at really coming up with certain conclusions at this point on the possible motive behind that. But marami nang lumabas about the wetting angle, and yan na ang vina-validate ng NBI. It looks like yan. And there, if at all there are other possible angles, it could only be either in addition to or complementary or related to the wetting angle.
If you establish that it's a wetting, the wetting is the motive for the killings, then you will be able to establish, I presume, the relationships behind all of this.
Yes,
no?
Exactly. That's why part of the investigation is the profiling of everyone. The profiling of the ones killed and those involved in the operations, the connections, the relationships. Sino yung magkakilala? Of course, nakita na natin yan sa mga various news reports. There have been certain reports already about that. So some of your colleagues have been too resourceful, and I commend them for that, for doing investigative journalism on this particular incident. At marami naman din sa mga lumalabas sa dyaryo ngayon, may mga basehan. Marami sa mga lumalabas sa dyaryo na confirm o na-validate dyan sa ongoing investigation. So, importante yung mga connection. Sino talaga tunay na magkakakilala? At kung magkakakilala sila, ano ba? Are they enemies? Are they allies? Are they competitors? Are they rivals? Etc. Sigurado may mga connection. Meron na mga na-establish na mga connection.
Was there involvement of PNP and Armed Forces personnel in Hueteng in this case?
It's always difficult really to alam mo, Jing, di ba, binatikos na nga ako ng iba dyan kung bakit sinabi ko daw kaagad yun na shoot out na kahit ongoing pa yung investigation. Although I don't care dun sa mga criticisms na yun, karapatan ko naman yun sabihin ko. Kasi alam ko kung ano yung istorya ng eyewitnesses at alam kong na-confirm sila. Yung mga sinabi nila na-confirm during the reenactment. What do you call that? Kung pinaninindigan ng mga witnesses na na walang munang pumutok galing sa Montero, how can there be shootout? Tapos ito na naman sa angle ng possible motive or theory, and then you said kung involved mga PNP. Now, we have some facts, we have some information, yung iba na mga na-validate na, and as I told you earlier, it looks like it's really the Hueteng angle. Now, since it's the Hueteng angle, as you very well know, it's not the monopoly of the bad guys. It's not the monopoly of members of the syndicates. As we all know, there are syndicates where the purported members or protectors are actually law enforcers, like police officials. I mean, for years that has been really a common knowledge. It's not just an open secret, but it's a common knowledge. So kung Hueteng talagang ugat nung insidente na yon, and you have on one side the alleged bad guys or the alleged Hueteng lord, who is seaman, and on the other side are PNP officials supported or backed by military guys, then easily you come up with a conclusion. Somehow, some of those involved, PNP officers or men involved in that operations, had connections to Seaman and his group. So if a Seaman is involved in illegal numbers in Hueteng, then lo and behold, some of those involved in the operations connected to him must have some involvement also in the operations.
If this is, well, like you said, Secretary, it's common knowledge. People know that who participates in Hueteng all over the country. How will this affect now, how will this impact on the national scale? No? Because if it's happening in Region 4, must be happening everywhere else.
Matagal na kasi talaga naman, katingnan mo yan, sila Bishop Cruz, and then other mga anti-Hueteng advocates. Matagal na nilang sinasabi yan, na kaya hindi natatapos o hindi natatopple yung problema o hindi natin na aalis yung problema ng Hueteng is because there seems to be no honest to goodness efforts on the part of the law enforcers to really run after them. Although, as you know, former Secretary, the late Secretary Jez Robredo, talagang seryoso siya dyan sa anti-Hueteng. And that is also now being pursued by the current leadership of DILG. So SECMAR, I know for a fact that he is also focused on that to get rid of illegal weteng. Nagsisimula na yan ngayon. Seryoso na ito na kampanya ng gobyerno. But since this problem has been there all these years, so many decades, hindi naman ganong kadali sugpuin yan. So I think it's about time that all efforts of government now towards eradicating this decades-old problem of wetting must bear fruit. Yan po ang ano natin. I think this is another test of the current the resolve of the current administration. But this incident, this Atimonan incident, just goes to prove that indeed unfortunately, some of our law enforcers are part of that.
On another issue, moving on, the Anti-Cybercrime Act, where are we on that, Justice Secretary? The TRO is going to end on February 6th.
Oh yes, and that is why oral arguments
Yeah.
uli, no? Because of that deadline. Because the Supreme Court has to decide whether or not when the TRO expires or lapses, then it's either the Supreme Court must dispose of the petitions already, or must decide, or must render its decision on the various petitions filed questioning that law, or it has to decide whether or not to extend the TRO.
Okay.
If it does not extend the TRO, and at the same time it is unable to decide or to resolve the petitions, then there would be no legal impediment for government to implement or to start implementing the anti-cybercrime law.
And what is the implementation plan of the DOJ?
Well, first, I think we'll be involved in the drafting of the IRR.
Okay.
There is a particular period prescribed in the law by which to draft the IRR, in the same manner that we're now drafting the IRR for the Anti-Enforced Disappearance Act.
Okay.
The Anti-Enforced Disappearance Act, as you know, was recently was signed, and we have 30 days to come up with the IRR, and
the
the
implementing rules and
DOJ is the lead
regulations.
agency.
Okay.
Now, for the anti-cybercrime law, kasama rin kami sa magda-draft ng IRR. So that would be one of the first steps to be done. And another one is the putting up of the cybercrime office, or officially coming up with a cybercrime office. Although we have a cybercrime office already in the DOJ, but that is not yet really that official, kasi unang-una wala pa kaming pondo dyan, wala pa kaming mga personnel dyan. But if the anti-cybercrime law is finally implemented, assuming that it's not struck down as unconstitutional, then pwede na kami. Pwede nang maging fully operational yung cybercrime office.
Okay. Justice Secretary will be back. Let's take a short break. Newscafe will return with the Justice Secretary after these reminders. You're still watching Newscafe on the Solar News Channel. Justice Secretary Leila de Lima is still with us. Secretary, the anti-cybercrime law, in the drafting of the implementing rules and regulations, who are involved?
Well, DOJ and DOST, a few others. I'm not sure anymore. It's stated in the law.
Is there a consultation process within that process of drafting the IRR?
Well, there's no prohibition for that, and we're open to involving many sectors, even media itself, and then NGOs, etc. We need inputs as to the implementation of the law, especially the vaguer provisions of the law, and sometimes that's exactly the function of the IRR. If there are vague provisions in the law, or
the more controversial provisions,
the more
like
controversial,
the takedown clause,
for as long as
example.
they're not struck down as null and void or unconstitutional. They can stand, those provisions can stand. Now, IRR can actually cure those deficiencies.
Do you think the Supreme Court is going to kill the takedown clause?
Well, OSG itself conceded to that. I mean, conceded to the unconstitutionality of that so-called takedown clause. But you know, it's not accurate to label that as a takedown clause. There's no authority for the Department of Justice or the Secretary of Justice to just order the closure of any item or any entry in the web, in the internet.
Or any website.
Or any website. It's it's the restrictive clause, or the power to restrict or temporarily make it inaccessible because of a prima facie finding of being violative of law, of the morals, or public policy.
And who determines that?
It's supposed to be the Department of Justice, but there's got to be a process, a summary procedure, a summary proceedings whereby the Secretary of Justice or the DOJ can determine that there is reason to close.
But this will have to go through a process, like you're saying.
It's got, yes. And kaya nga naging very questionable in that particular provision is because it was placed in a separate independent provision in the law. It should have been part of an earlier provision where a particular process is prescribed, which goes through some judicial determination. And pwede rin kasi either through the courts or pwede rin DOJ for as long as there is a process. And you know, it's not supposed to be a motu proprio thing, an exercise of a power motu proprio, just like that, because it might be prone to abuse by the Department of Justice. I can guarantee that there would be no abuse on the part of this DOJ under my watch, for example. But how sure are we
that in the future?
Yes, in the future.
What do you think is the mindset of the Supreme Court, and you want to predict what's going to happen?
We're keeping our fingers crossed, at least on the part of the Department of Justice and some of those who believe in and all those who believe in the wisdom of the law or in the necessity of the law. We're keeping our fingers crossed that the entire law will not be struck down as unconstitutional. If at all, maybe one or two provisions. That is my forecast. But we really don't know.
In the closing minutes of the program, how have you been on your job? How do you feel about your job thus far?
It's, well, by and large, it's fulfilling because I love the challenge. In fact, I don't feel right if there's no controversy on a particular day, because you know it's all part of the job, especially this position, Secretary of Justice. You know, justice is such an overarching concern.
It's a huge responsibility.
It's a huge responsibility. Now, although sometimes I really don't know how I'm able to handle everything, my attitude is that first things first, whatever is the first challenge or the first problem that come my way when I wake up, then I confront. I confront those. You know, first things first. But challenges seem to be never ending. But I welcome actually those challenges. Of course, sometimes I get frustrated, especially when I see that you know, people tend to come up with baseless conclusions, or that they hit you without basis. You know, those intrigues, etc. But it comes with a It goes with the territory.
Is the Department of Justice structured to dispense justice? Or can it be more effective in another way?
Yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of making the justice system a truly working one, an effective one. There are still injustices and there are still structural or systemic deficiencies. There are still gaps. The justice system has several pillars, and the challenge is for all of these pillars to work hand in hand towards achieving the same goal, which is to deliver justice for all. But in our own little way, and in coordination with the other justice sector agencies, including the Supreme Court, we are trying to, or we've been initiating certain justice reform programs to make it really more effective. Of course, one problem is always the delay, and the next is
Correct.
the corruption.
Correct. The President has always mentioned in his State of the Nation addresses
Yeah.
about the delay in the justice system.
Yes.
And what are the top 3 things you're looking at to address this?
Well, it's always a matter of having, the dedicated manpower.
Okay.
In the DOJ, for example, prosecutors. For as long as you have dedicated and competent prosecutors, it's easy to achieve those objectives, because the rules are there, the laws are there, the rules provide for certain periods to dispose of certain cases. So if our workers, if our prosecutors are dedicated enough, then they comply with those rules. And then, of course, we know that we undertake a lot of anti-corruption programs now. We are getting rid, although I'd like to believe that it's just a small minority, those who go astray in the performance of their other functions. And there are mechanisms to address that, like administrative sanctions
Administrative processes.
and administrative processes.
There's a question that we're going to ask, a question that came in. What can you say about the people who say that you're always backed by the palace in everything you do? Is this a fair assumption because you're a close ally of the president?
Ally or not, for as long as you're doing your job, and the palace sees that you're really doing your job, and you are everything you do is consistent with the Daang Matuwid
Right.
platform of this government and of this president, then what's wrong with that? The palace backing up its own people. That is supposed to be expected. That is expected of the president, to support his people.
And how is your relationship with the president on a personal basis?
Oh, I'm very pleased and very happy, because I work well with the president. I get assignments from him, of course. Some of them direct assignments from him on top of all my responsibilities as Secretary of Justice, and not only the DOJ proper, but the attached agencies. And I welcome more work. I get problematic and I get worried if I'm not being given an assignment.
Do you take your work home with you?
Oh, yes. Every night.
Every night?
Every day, every night, I have take-home work. I take home boxes of folders, because paperwork is also endless.
What time do you sleep, Secretary?
An average, normally it's between 12 to 1, 12 midnight to 1 in the morning, and
Then
then
you're up
I
early?
wake up between 5 to 6 in the morning. That's on ordinary days. On weekends, medyo matagal-tagal ang tulog ko. But I still take home work even during weekend. No choice. Otherwise, mas tambak.
And how's the family? How has the job affected your family?
Well, as you know, I'm not married anymore. I'm a solo parent.
Okay.
I have only one child with me. My eldest child, Israel, a special child, is now 30 years old. He's
Okay.
autistic, but he's very sweet.
Okay.
So he's the only one with me in the house, aside from the help.
What does Israel think about your work?
Oh, it's very sweet. No complaints whatsoever from him. Israel, no complaints whatsoever.
What's in the future for Justice Secretary
I
Leila
don't
de
know.
Lima?
I
Whatever
don't-
comes your way.
Yes, que sera, sera.
And what are the top 3 things you'd like to see done under your watch in the Justice Department?
To have more convictions and higher disposition rate of our preliminary investigation. And I keep telling our people, I keep telling our co-workers in the department that I want this institution to be truly a trusted and respected institution. And we have to work for it.
How long do you think it's going to take?
Soon. I think, of course, there are always problems.
Yeah.
You can never tell. For example, NBI. NBI is a constituent agency. I'm very pleased about the performance of NBI nowadays. It's been saddled and burdened with lots of work, with lots of assignments. And I keep telling them that should be taken in a positive manner, in the sense that if you have more work, that means you're being trusted by the people. It's so important that we get the public on our side, and we have a thinking public. The public knows exactly who are doing well, who are performing well, who are, who are sincere in the performance of their work. So for as long as we're trusted by the people, even if there are occasional criticism from certain sectors, okay lang yun.
Well, Secretary, thanks for joining us. Thank you for your time.
Well,
That's all we have for today. I'd like to thank the Secretary, Justice Secretary Leila de Lima, for giving us this opportunity for a one-on-one interview. Secretary, thank you very much.
it's been a pleasure.
And thank you. Join us again next Friday for another 360-degree discussion right here on Newscafe on the Solo News Channel. Salamat po.